Learn English through stories.
50 Famous People. A Book of Short Stories. By James Baldwin. Saving the Birds. One day in spring 4 men were riding on horseback along a country road. These men were lawyers, and they were going to the next town to attend court. There had been a rain, and the ground was very soft. Water was dripping from the trees, and the grass was wet. The 4 lawyers rode along, one behind another, for the pathway was narrow, and the mud on each side of it was deep. They rode slowly, and talked and laughed and were very jolly. As they were passing through a grove of small trees, they heard a great fluttering over their heads, and a feeble chirping in the grass by the roadside. Stiff, 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 came from the leafy branches above them. Cheep, 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 came from the wet grass. What is the matter here? Asked the first lawyer, whose name was Speed. Oh, it's only some old robins, said the second lawyer, whose name was Hardin. The storm has blown 2 of the little ones out of the nest. They are too young to fly, and the mother bird is making a great fuss about it. What a pity! They'll die down there in the grass, said the third lawyer, whose name I forget. Oh, well. They're nothing but birds, said Mr. Hardin. Why should we bother? Yes, why should we, said Mr. Speed. The 3 men, as they passed, looked down and saw the little birds fluttering in the cold, wet grass. They saw the mother robin flying about, and crying to her mate. Then they rode on, talking and laughing as before. In a few minutes they had forgotten about the birds. But the 4th lawyer, whose name was Abraham Lincoln, stopped. He got down from his horse and very gently took the little ones up in his big warm hands. They did not seem frightened, but chirped softly, as if they knew they were safe. Never mind, my little fellows, said Mr. Lincoln, I will put you in your own cozy little bed. Then he looked up to find the nest from which they had fallen. It was high, much higher than he could reach. But Mr. Lincoln could climb. He had climbed many a tree when he was a boy. He put the birds softly, one by one, into their warm little home. 2 other baby birds were there, that had not fallen out. All cuddled down together and were very happy. Soon the 3 lawyers who had ridden ahead stopped at a spring to give their horses water. Where is Lincoln? Asked one. All were surprised to find that he was not with them. Do you remember those birds? Said Mr. Speed. Very likely he has stopped to take care of them. In a few minutes Mr. Lincoln joined them. His shoes were covered with mud, he had torn his coat on the thorny tree. Hello, Abraham, said Mr. Hardin. Where have you been? I stopped a minute to give those birds to their mother, he answered. Well, we always thought you were a hero, said Mr. Speed. Now we know it. Then all 3 of them laughed heartily. They thought it so foolish that a strong man should take so much trouble just for some worthless young birds. Gentlemen, said Mr. Lincoln, I could not have slept tonight, if I had left those helpless little robins to perish in the wet grass. Abraham Lincoln afterwards became very famous as a lawyer and statesman. He was elected president. Next to Washington, he was the greatest American. Another bird story. A great battle had begun. Cannon were booming, some far away, some near at hand. Soldiers were marching through the fields. Men on horseback were riding in haste toward the front. Whiz! A cannon ball struck the ground, quite near to a company of soldiers. But they marched straight onward. The drums were beating, the fifes were playing. Whiz! Another cannon ball flew through the air and struck a tree nearby. A brave general was riding across the field. One ball after another came whizzing near him. "General, you are in danger here," said an officer who was riding with him. "You had better fall back to a place of safety." But the general rode on. Suddenly he stopped at the foot of a tree. "Halt!" he cried to the men who were with him. He leaped from his horse. He stooped and picked up a bird's nest that had fallen upon the ground. In the nest were some tiny, half-fledged birds. Their mouths were open for the food they were expecting their mother to give them. "I cannot think of leaving these little things here to be trampled upon," said the general. He lifted the nest gently and put it in a safe place in the forks of the tree. Whiz! Another cannon ball. He leaped into the saddle, and away he dashed with his officers close behind him. Whiz! 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 He had done one good deed. He would do many more before the war was over. Boom! 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 The cannon were roaring, the balls were flying, the battle was raging. But amid all the turmoil and danger, the little birds chirped happily in the safe shelter where the great general, Robert E. Lee, had placed them. "He prayeth best, who loveth best all things both great and small, for the dear God who loveth us, He made and loveth all." Speaking a piece. Two children, brother and sister, were on their way to school. Both were very small. The boy was only 4 years old, and the girl was not yet 6. "Come, Edward, we must hurry," said the sister. "We must not be late." With one hand the little boy clung to his sister's arm, and with the other he held his primer. This primer was his only book, and he loved it. It had a bright blue cover, which he was careful not to soil. And in it were some odd little pictures, which he never grew tired of looking at. Edward could spell nearly all the words in his primer, and he could read quite well. The school was more than a mile from their home, and the children trotted along as fast as their short legs could carry them. At a place where 2 roads crossed, they saw a tall gentleman coming to meet them. He was dressed in black, and had a very pleasant face. "Oh, Edward, there is Mr. Harris," whispered the little girl. "Don't forget your manners." They were glad to see Mr. Harris, for he was the minister. They stopped by the side of the road and made their manners. Edward bowed very gracefully, and his sister curtsied. "Good morning, children," said the minister, and he kindly shook hands with both. "I have something here for little Edward," he said. Then he took from his pocket a sheet of paper on which some verses were written. See. It is a little speech that I have written for him. The teacher will soon ask him to speak a piece at school, and I am sure that he can learn this easily and speak it well. Edward took the paper and thanked the kind minister. Mother will help him learn it, said his sister. Yes, I will try to learn it, said Edward. Do so, my child, said the minister, and I hope that when you grow up you will become a wise man and a great orator. Then the two children hurried on to school. The speech was not hard to learn, and Edward soon knew every word of it. When the time came for him to speak, his mother and the minister were both there to hear him. He spoke so well that everybody was pleased. He pronounced every word plainly, as though he were talking to his schoolmates. Would you like to read his speech? Here it is. Pray, how shall I, a little lad, in speaking make a figure? You're only joking, I'm afraid. Just wait till I am bigger. But since you wish to hear my part, and urge me to begin it, I'll strive for praise with all my heart, though small the hope to win it. I'll tell a tale how Farmer John a little roan colt bred, sir, which every night and every morn he watered and he fed, sir. Said neighbor Joe to Farmer John, you surely are a dolt, sir, to spend such time and care upon a little useless colt, sir. Said Farmer John to neighbor Joe, I bring my little roan up, not for the good he now can do, but will do when he's grown up. The moral you can plainly see, to keep the tale from spoiling. The little colt you think is me, I know it by your smiling. And now, my friends, please to excuse my lisping and my stammers. I, for this once, have done my best, and so, I'll make my manners. The little boy's name was Edward Everett. He grew up to become a famous man and one of our greatest orators. Vocabulary words. Fluttering, the motion of flapping or moving quickly and lightly, typically used to describe the rapid movement of wings or small objects. Feeble, lacking strength, physically or mentally weak. Jolly, merry and cheerful, full of high spirits. Nest, a structure made by a bird for laying eggs and sheltering its young. Hero, a person admired for their courage, outstanding achievements, or noble qualities. Turmoil, a state of confusion, disturbance, or agitation. Orator, a skilled and eloquent public speaker. Colt, a young male horse, typically under 4 years old. Dolt, a person who is slow-witted, unintelligent, or lacks common sense. Lisping, speaking with a speech defect, characterized by the imperfect pronunciation of sibilant sounds, like S and Z. Manners, social behavior, politeness, and etiquette in one's conduct.